Hi folks, Adam Andrews here. We always talk about a great conversation at Center for Lit, how the great works of Western literature are the author's contributions to a long-running conversation about ideas like, what's a human being? Is there a God? If so, what is he like? What's his relationship with man? What's a good society? What's a good love? What's a good life? What's a good death? This idea of the great conversation helps us understand the warp and woof of Western literature, understand the history of ideas that makes our civilization great. Recent contributions to that conversation, however, modern literature to be specific, often gets kind of a bad rap among concerned parents and homeschoolers. A lot of this is for good reason, because works written in the last 100 years tend to be a lot darker, philosophically speaking, than works written before that time, before, say, 1914. I wonder if you've ever thought about the fact that these books, written in the last 100 years, are making an important contribution to that great conversation in their own rights. The fact that they are darker and maybe more depressing, less hopeful about the future, has a lot to do with when they were written, the cultural circumstances that surrounded the authors of those works, and that understanding them in that context actually helps us understand the history of Western civilization, just in exactly the same way that understanding something about ancient Roman culture helps us put the works of the ancient Roman authors in their context. That perhaps understanding modern literature on its own terms is as noble a pursuit as understanding 19th century British literature on its own terms, or Shakespearean Elizabethan literature on its own terms. In fact, I would argue that the contributions made by modern literature to that great conversation are every bit as profound and important as contributions made by earlier ages. One of the reasons that they're profound and important to us is that they represent the contributions of our own civilization. Understanding modern lit is a little bit like understanding yourself. The writers of modern lit lived in the world that we live in, face a lot of the same concerns and problems that we face today. And so they can speak for us and speak to our world in ways that Virgil and Shakespeare cannot. That's one reason I think students ought to be careful to include works of modern literature in their reading diets. And teachers ought to go ahead and include them in curriculum as well. An example that always provides fodder for a great conversation for me is F. Scott Fitzgerald's The Great Gatsby, early 20th century novel. It was very famous in its day and has only grown more famous since. The story of Jay Gatsby, the mysterious tycoon who throws lavish parties, who searches and strives for earthly perfection and a goal that he can't quite reach, and finally meets his destruction when he fails to reach it. A lot of people pan this book because it's filled with debauchery and lasciviousness and crime, and there's absolutely no hint of supernatural salvation or a moral code. The attitude of the protagonist is world-weary and depressing. A lot of people come away from that book saying, good grief, what in the world good is The Great Gatsby? Or works like it. We should strike them from our lists. But I think they're important. I think they speak eloquently of the problems facing 20th century man in his particular time and place, a world ravaged by war, a world where science was on the ascendancy and questioned long-held assumptions about the nature and role of God in the world. In fact, encouraged thinking people to jettison the idea of God altogether, but provided nothing in its place, nothing in his place, I should say, that gave a mooring for culture. The early 20th century was a very disheartening time for thoughtful men, and the artists that live in that time accurately reflected these insecurities. Understanding 20th century culture is very important for a creature of that culture, for a member of that culture, which we are here in the early 21st century. And understanding the art produced by that culture is maybe the quickest way in to getting a grasp of the culture itself. That isn't to say that I wish American culture and Western culture could look like it did in 1925 forever and ever. But looking back to history as a way to recreate the future isn't a very good project anyway. The works of the past, literary, artistic, historical, philosophical, theological, are primarily useful for showing us where we've been and showing us who we are. And modern literature has wonderful things to say about both of those questions. I urge you to consider it, to add it to your reading diet, as it were. Thanks for listening. Until we meet again, happy reading.